A low ridge of red sandstone rises from the Gobi floor, its surface broken by wind and winter frost. Near the base, a cluster of long eggs lies inside the rock. Their shells are dark, ridged and pressed into a rough circle. Across them rests the partial skeleton of a small dinosaur. The skull is crushed. One forelimb reaches toward the clutch. The body has remained where sediment closed around it more than 70 million years ago. At first glance, the arrangement seems easy to explain. An animal has approached a nest. It has lowered its head toward the eggs. Something sudden has buried predator and prey together. The bones appear to preserve a crime at the moment it was interrupted. That was how the fossil was read when it entered science, and the interpretation became permanent in the animal's name before anyone understood what the nest actually contained. Oviraptor means egg thief. The species name, Velociraptor, was intended to suggest a fondness for ceratopsian eggs. Few dinosaurs have carried an accusation so directly inside their scientific identity. For generations, museum labels and illustrated books repeated the same scene: a quick, beaked raider stealing from Protoceratops while the desert closed in. The image was memorable because it seemed to turn stone into behavior. It was also built on an assumption. The fossil did not change when the interpretation changed. The skull did not move. The eggs did not rearrange themselves. Nothing new appeared in the original block of sandstone. What changed was the evidence around it. Other nests were found. Embryos emerged from similar eggs. Adults of related dinosaurs were discovered lying over clutches in postures that looked less like feeding and more like attendance. A supposed thief began to resemble a parent. This reversal is the reason Oviraptor matters far beyond the shape of its skeleton. It shows how paleontology works when evidence is incomplete, how a reasonable conclusion can become a durable error, and how new fossils can reopen a case that seemed settled. It also brings us close to one of the most intimate parts of dinosaur life: not hunting, not migration, not extinction, but the quiet work of making a nest and remaining beside it. If journeys into the dinosaur age are what bring you to Jurassical, subscribing keeps the next one close. The story begins in the summer of 1923, when the American Museum of Natural History's Central Asiatic expeditions were working at Banjak in southern Mongolia, the place later known in English as the Flaming Cliffs. The expedition had come with broad ambitions. Its members searched for ancient mammals and dinosaurs across a landscape of dry basins, exposed sandstone, and long distances without roads. Fossils appeared wherever erosion had cut into the Cretaceous rock. On July 13, field worker George Olson reported objects that looked like eggs. At first, the idea seemed doubtful. Dinosaur eggs had not yet been securely recognized by science, and rounded stones can imitate biological shapes. But the broken surfaces showed shell. More eggs appeared together. The discovery became one of the expedition's most celebrated finds because it offered physical evidence for something obvious in retrospect, but still unproven at the time. Dinosaurs laid eggs. The abundance of Protoceratops at Banjak shaped the first interpretation. This small horned dinosaur was common in the formation, represented by skulls and skeletons in many stages of growth. When eggs were found in the same rocks, it seemed reasonable to connect them with the animal that appeared everywhere else. No embryo had yet been recovered from those particular egg forms. Without a body inside the shell, ownership had to be inferred from association. The next year, Henry Fairfield Osborn described a peculiar theropod skeleton found close to one of the clutches. The specimen included a damaged skull, jaws, parts of the neck, and a forelimb. Its toothless mouth ended in a strong beak. The bones were unlike those of familiar large meat-eating dinosaurs. Osborn recognized a new genus and species, but the position beside the eggs influenced nearly every part of the name he chose. He did not claim absolute certainty. The original description allowed that the animal might have been beside its own nest. Yet the egg-stealing interpretation was vivid, simple, and easy to repeat. Once the genus was called Oviraptor, caution disappeared from many later retellings. A tentative possibility hardened into character. The animal became a specialized nest robber, often illustrated with an egg clamped between its jaws, even though no egg was found inside its mouth or stomach. Names can survive longer than explanations. A scientific name is meant to provide stability, so it is rarely replaced merely because the story behind it proves mistaken. Basilosaurus is a whale whose name means king lizard. Apatosaurus carries a name born from a different anatomical confusion. Oviraptor remains Oviraptor for the same practical reason. The label preserves the history of discovery, including the error that accompanied it. To understand what the fossil may truly represent, the modern desert has to be stripped away. Bein Zak during the late Cretaceous was dry, but it was not empty. Sand moved across dune fields. Low areas collected water after storms. Temporary streams cut shallow channels, and patches of vegetation held along better watered ground. The environment could preserve animals with remarkable completeness when dunes collapsed, sand moved suddenly, or sediment buried bodies before scavengers scattered them. The cliffs now glow orange and red in evening light because erosion has exposed layers of sandstone and silt. In Oviraptor's time, those layers were loose ground. Wind pushed grains up dune faces and dropped them on the sheltered side. Rain sometimes arrived in short, forceful events. Water ran where the surface allowed it, carrying mud, leaves, eggshell, and bone into depressions. A nest built in such a place existed between two dangers: drying in the open air and burial beneath moving sediment. Oviraptor was not large. Estimates based on its close relatives place it at roughly 2 meters in length, perhaps somewhat more depending on the reconstruction, with much of that length carried in the tail. Its body would have stood around the height of a large ground bird. It walked on 2 long hind limbs. The forelimbs were strong and ended in 3 clawed fingers. Feathers are not preserved with the type specimen, but its position within the feathered Maniraptoran dinosaurs makes a substantial covering highly likely. The head was the feature that drew the most attention. Oviraptor had a short, deep skull with large openings that reduced weight. The jaws lacked teeth and were sheathed in life by a keratinous beak. A bony crest rose over the snout, although the original skull is distorted and incomplete, making the exact external shape uncertain. Close relatives show that these crests varied greatly, from low ridges to tall, cassowary-like structures. Such a skull does not reveal one obvious diet. A sharp-toothed jaw points toward flesh. Broad, grinding teeth indicate repeated processing of plants. Oviraptor offers neither. Its beak could cut, pinch, crush, or strip. Powerful jaw muscles may have allowed it to handle resistant food, but resistant food includes many possibilities: hard seeds, fibrous plant parts, shellfish, small vertebrates, insects, carrion, or eggs encountered opportunistically. The old idea of a dedicated egg-eater was never based on stomach contents. It came from geography within a single fossil block. The animal was near eggs, therefore it had come to eat them. Yet living animals spend time beside eggs for many reasons. A fox may raid a nest. A lizard may pass it by. A bird may defend it, shade it, turn it, or settle over it through a cold night. Association alone cannot decide which behavior occurred. Fossils of behavior are rare because behavior does not mineralize. Bone can preserve anatomy. Teeth can preserve wear. Footprints can preserve motion for a few seconds. A nest with an adult above it is different. It appears to capture a relationship between animal and object, but even then the surrounding sediment has to be read carefully. Was the body transported? Were the eggs moved? Did burial happen at once? Could later pressure have pushed unrelated remains together? The Oviraptor-type specimen was discovered in a setting where rapid burial was plausible. Its close position to the eggs is real. What remained uncertain was the meaning of that position. Early paleontologists lacked the comparative fossils needed to test the idea. They had no recognized oviraptorid embryos, no series of brooding adults, and no clear model of how these dinosaurs arranged their nests. The first explanation filled an empty space in knowledge. That empty space began to close 7 decades later. In the early 1990s, joint Mongolian and American expeditions returned to the Gobi with different methods, different questions, and decades of accumulated anatomical knowledge. At Ukha Tolgod, another rich late Cretaceous locality, researchers found eggs resembling those historically assigned to Protoceratops. One contained the small skeleton of an embryo, folded into the narrow interior. The embryo's bones were delicate, but its identity was visible in the skull. It had features linking it to oviraptorids, not to horned dinosaurs. The egg type beside the original Oviraptor was therefore no longer safely attributed to Protoceratops. The central piece of the accusation had failed. The animal at the nest had been found beside eggs of the kind laid by its own close relatives. That discovery did not prove every detail of the 1923 scene. The embryo was not inside one of the exact eggs beneath the Oviraptor-type specimen, and the adult itself remains incomplete. Paleontology rarely provides the same clarity as a controlled observation, but the simplest interpretation changed. A dinosaur beside eggs, known to be oviraptorid-like, was no longer best treated as an intruder. It might have been the nest owner. Soon, stronger evidence appeared. An adult oviraptorid was found spread over a clutch at Ukha Tolgod. Its hind limbs occupied the open center. The arms extended around the eggs. The body lay low and symmetrical, closely matching the posture of a bird covering a nest. Another specimen reinforced the pattern. These animals had not merely died near eggs. Their skeletons followed the architecture of the clutch. Most of those famous brooding specimens belonged to Tsitipati, a close relative that was larger and better known from complete remains. Popular accounts often call them Oviraptor because the name is familiar and because all belong to the wider Oviraptorosaur group. Scientifically, the distinction matters. Oviraptor Velociraptor is known from limited material. Tsitipati osmolske supplies much of the detailed anatomy and nesting posture that artists once transferred directly onto Oviraptor. This does not weaken the title of egg guardian. It makes it more accurate. The original animal sits at the beginning of a broader pattern revealed across its relatives. We are not looking at one perfect fossil that answers every question. We are combining the type specimen, embryo-bearing eggs, multiple adult clutch associations, eggshell structure, and the anatomy of related species. Together, those lines of evidence describe a reproductive system unlike any nest built by a living animal. The misunderstanding was corrected not by finding a written record in stone, but by building a larger comparison. One fossil suggested theft. A second identified the egg layer. A third preserved posture. More clutches showed repeated geometry. Each find changed the probability of the others. The result is one of paleontology's clearest examples of a dinosaur's reputation being revised by evidence rather than imagination. The nest in the sandstone now asks a different question. Instead of wondering how an egg thief was caught, we can ask why a parent remained. Was it warming the clutch, shading it from the sun, shielding it from wind-blown sand, or guarding it against small predators? Did both sexes attend? How long did incubation last? Did the hatchlings leave at once, or remain close to the adult? The fossil opens more questions than the old story ever allowed. Those questions lead away from the museum label and back into the Cretaceous desert, where an oviraptorid lowers its body into the center of a ring of eggs. Its legs fold beneath it, the arms spread across the outer edge. Feathers settle over the exposed ends of the clutch. Wind moves grains against the nest wall. Nothing in the scene is dramatic by the standards of dinosaur art. That is what makes it valuable. It is ordinary life, preserved because ordinary life ended suddenly. A complete oviraptorid clutch does not look like a loose pile. The eggs are elongated, with one end more pointed than the other, and they were placed in pairs. Those pairs formed rings around an open center. In larger nests, one ring could rise above another, separated by sediment, creating a low mound with a hollow in the middle. The pattern is orderly enough that the laying animal must have moved around the nest with care. Some clutches preserve more than 20 eggs. Others are incomplete because erosion has removed one side, because embryos hatched, or because the nest failed before it was buried. The eggs commonly assigned to medium-sized oviraptorids were around the length of a human forearm, though size varied across the group. Giant oviraptorosaurs produced eggs far larger. Whatever the species, the shell had to balance two opposing needs: strength against the outside world and permeability for the embryo breathing within. Eggshell is not a sealed wall. Microscopic pores allow oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide and water vapor to leave. Their number and distribution can reveal whether an egg was exposed, covered, or partly buried. Oviraptorid shells suggest a mixed arrangement. The pointed ends were set into sediment, while the broader ends remained more open to the air, matching the reconstructed angle of the eggs in many clutches. That position would stabilize a narrow egg without burying it completely. It also placed the air cell end nearer the center of the nest and closer to the attending adult. The arrangement is not identical to a modern bird nest. Most birds lay eggs in a single layer and can turn or rearrange them. Oviraptorid eggs were partly fixed in place. Once the rings were built, the clutch became a three-dimensional structure that could not easily be shuffled. Pairs of eggs provide another clue. Many non-avian dinosaurs appear to have retained two functioning oviducts, unlike most living birds, which usually produce an egg from one functional oviduct at a time. Oviraptorid clutches seem to record 2 eggs being added in each laying episode. The adult may have stood or crouched over the nest, deposited a pair, then shifted position before the next pair was laid. Reconstructing the sequence from fossil geometry suggests the inner ring came first. The animal turned around the central space, adding pairs at intervals. Sediment was placed or accumulated between levels. Later eggs formed a wider outer ring, sometimes higher than the first. The completed nest could contain a large clutch without spreading so far that the parent could no longer cover it. The open center was not wasted space. It held the adult's folded legs and supported the belly without placing the full body mass directly on the eggs. A bird the size of a pigeon can settle onto a nest without much difficulty. An oviraptorid weighing tens or perhaps more than 100 kilograms faced a different problem. Its eggs had to remain close enough for attendance while being protected from the pressure of the parent itself. The skeletons show the solution. Feet and lower legs fit into the central hollow. The hips remained above the middle. The arms extended outward over the ring, and the chest lay low. Weight was carried through the center and the ground around it rather than through the shells. It was a nest designed around the adult body, or a body behaviorally adjusted to the nest, with each shaping the other over generations. Feathers would have changed the contact surface. Basal oviraptorosaurs from China preserve filamentous coverings and developed wing feathers, and the broader group sits well inside a feathered branch of theropod evolution. Even where feathers are not directly fossilized, long quill-like attachment structures on some oviraptorosaur tails and the proportions of the forelimbs support elaborate plumage. An adult on a clutch was not a bare reptile pressed against sand. The wings were not capable of powered flight in animals the size and shape of Oviraptor or Psittapati. Their importance may have been elsewhere. Extended forelimbs covered more of the clutch than skin and bone alone could reach. Long feathers could shelter the exposed egg ends, reduce heat loss at night, shade the clutch during the day, and keep moving sand from collecting between the shells. A similar function exists in modern birds, though the comparison has limits. Ostriches spread broad wings over chicks and eggs. Ground nesting birds use body position to control sun, rain, and airflow. An oviraptorid's feathered arms may have performed several tasks at once: display when standing, balance while moving, and protection when folded around a nest. Evolution often preserves a structure because it solves more than one problem. The tail may have carried a fan. Several Oviraptorosaurs possess short, fused terminal vertebrae that resemble a pygostyle, the bony support associated with tail feathers in birds. Muscle attachment patterns indicate a tail able to move with precision. A fan could have been used in display, especially around the prominent skull crest and feathered arms, producing an animal whose social signals were visual and highly conspicuous. Nothing about this plumage can be reconstructed color by color for Oviraptor. Fossils do not preserve its feather pigments, and close relatives cannot supply an exact pattern. The safest picture is functional rather than decorative, a warm covering over the body, larger feathers on the arms, and likely display plumage around the tail. The old scaly egg thief belonged to an earlier stage of dinosaur reconstruction. The crest creates the same challenge. Oviraptor's skull was crushed during fossilization, and the crest is incomplete. Citipati has a taller, more complete crest and is often used as a visual model, but copying it exactly onto Oviraptor risks turning a relative into the animal itself. The living Oviraptor probably carried a noticeable structure above the beak. Its precise height, profile, and keratin covering remain uncertain. Crests on living birds can advertise maturity, species, condition, or social status. They can also change the apparent size of the head without adding much weight. In a landscape where several similar Oviraptorid species might live within the same region, shape and color could help individuals recognize their own kind. That is plausible, but the fossil does not tell us which signal mattered most. The hands were more than supports for feathers. 3 fingers ended in curved claws, and the forelimbs retained substantial mobility. They could have pulled vegetation, handled food, scraped sediment, or helped shape the nest. A nesting animal needs to move loose ground without the specialized feet of a megapode or the bill of a shorebird. Oviraptor had both clawed hands and strong hind feet available for the work. No preserved nest shows a set of construction marks that can be assigned confidently to individual movements. The mound itself is usually inferred from egg angle and body position rather than preserved as a clean wall. Wind-blown deposits are easily reworked. A low rim can erode before burial, and later pressure can flatten the clutch. Every reconstruction, therefore, contains a measure of engineering based on fossils that began to deform as soon as sediment accumulated. Even so, repeated patterns across separate sites are difficult to dismiss. Paired eggs recur. Concentric or spiral arrangements recur. Adults occur in the center with arms spread across the edge. The same relationship appears too often to be an accident of transport. An Oviraptorid nest was a recognizable behavior, inherited and repeated by animals that never saw one another but followed the same biological instructions. How much heat reached the eggs remains debated. The adults certainly attended the clutch in at least some species. Whether that attendance worked like the direct contact incubation of most modern birds is harder to establish. Partly buried eggs, multiple tiers, and a small area of contact would make efficient heat transfer more difficult. Some inner eggs may never have touched the body at all. Experiments with reconstructed nests show that an endothermic adult could still raise clutch temperatures above the surrounding air. Heat might pass through exposed shell, through sediment, and from the adult's legs within the center. Yet recent physical models also suggest the system was less efficient than modern avian incubation. The parent may have warmed, shaded, and stabilized the nest without controlling every egg at the same temperature. That intermediate condition is important. Dinosaur reproduction did not move in one step from buried reptile nests to the open, carefully regulated nests of living birds. Oviraptorids seem to occupy a stage between them. Their eggs were partly embedded, but attended from above. Their bodies were feathered, and their posture was bird-like, yet the clutch architecture retained features with no close modern equivalent. Temperature differences within the rings may have affected development. Embryos from some Oviraptorid clutches are not all at the same stage. One explanation is that eggs were laid over an extended period and began developing at different times. Another is that outer eggs received more heat than inner eggs. Both processes could operate together, producing hatchlings that emerged across days rather than within a few coordinated hours. Asynchronous hatching creates new problems for a parent. The first chick may be active, while other eggs remain sealed. An adult cannot simply leave the nest if the remaining embryos still depend on protection. Nor can it ignore mobile young in a landscape of small predators, heat, and blowing sand. Whether oviraptorid hatchlings stayed in the nest, moved nearby, or followed another adult is unknown. The embryos were well developed before hatching. Tiny skull bones, vertebrae, and limbs show the same general body plan as the adults, compressed into the available space. Some preserved postures resemble the tucked arrangement seen in bird embryos before they break the shell. This does not make them modern birds, but it shows that pieces of avian development were already present among non-avian theropods. To hatch, the young animal had to fracture a shell that had protected it for weeks or months. Living birds often use a temporary egg tooth or hardened structure near the beak. Evidence for an equivalent in oviraptorids is limited. The embryo may have pushed repeatedly against the blunt end, where the air cell and exposed shell gave room to begin. Once a crack opened, the dry nest air entered a chamber that had been closed since the egg was laid. The shell fragments left behind could outlast the hatchling. Broken pieces might remain in the nest, be kicked outward, or be carried by wind and water. Paleontologists distinguish hatched eggs from crushed or eroded ones by fracture patterns when preservation permits. A nest with open shells is not automatically a successful nursery. Sediment pressure can imitate hatching, and weathering can remove the evidence needed to decide. Success would have produced several small feathered animals with short faces and long legs. Their proportions may have differed from adults. Young theropods often had larger eyes and less developed crests, reflecting both growth and changing behavior. A hatchling did not need the full display structure of a mature animal. It needed to move, feed, regulate temperature, and avoid becoming food. Whether the adult brought meals is uncertain. Oviraptorid nesting posture supports attendance before hatching, but it does not prove prolonged care afterward. The young could have been relatively precocial, leaving the nest soon after emergence, or they may have depended on adults while their limbs and feeding apparatus strengthened. Fossils of family groups would help, but the record remains scattered. The temptation is to complete the scene using a familiar bird. A parent lowers food into an open beak. Chicks call from the center. Another adult returns across the dunes. None of that is impossible, but none is directly preserved for Oviraptor. The responsible reconstruction stops where the evidence stops. It gives the animal a nest, a clutch, feathers, and attendance. Then leaves the details of family life partly open. That restraint does not make the scene empty. A dinosaur remaining over eggs already changes the old image completely. It places time, risk, and repeated behavior into the fossil. The adult had invested in shell, nest construction, laying, and attendance. Whatever happened at the end, those eggs were not casual objects on a feeding ground. They were the center of a reproductive effort. The body over the clutch may have been buried by a collapsing dune, a sudden pulse of sediment, or another rapid event. Death could have come before the animal had time to stand. The arms remained extended. The legs remained folded. Sand entered the nest, packed around the eggs, and began the long process that turned shell into fossil and an act of care into a misunderstanding. Away from the nest, Oviraptor lived in a community where almost every familiar category becomes misleading. It was a theropod, the same broad branch that includes giant predators such as Tyrannosaurus, yet its skull had no teeth. It had feathered arms, but could not fly. Its beak looked capable of force, though the food that force was applied to remains disputed. The animal was specialized, but the specialization does not point cleanly toward one modern equivalent. The lower jaw was deep and strongly built. Bone at the front formed a broad surface beneath the beak, while the joint allowed powerful muscles to close the mouth. Some relatives possessed ridges and shelves suited to crushing or shearing. Older reconstructions treated these features as tools for breaking eggs. A beak could certainly open an egg, but a structure capable of that act could also crack seeds, sever stems, crush small shells, or tear flesh from carrion. Diet leaves evidence in several ways. Teeth can carry microscopic scratches. Stomach regions can preserve bones, seeds, or stones. Coprolites can contain the remains of meals. Stable isotopes may reflect broad feeding levels. Oviraptor itself offers little direct material of this kind. The safest conclusion is not that it ate one specific food, but that it probably had more options than its old reputation allowed. Some early Oviraptorosaurs preserved small stones or plant-like material in the abdominal region, suggesting herbivory or omnivory in at least parts of the group. Other specimens have been associated with lizard remains or possible prey, though those cases can be difficult to interpret. The range of skull forms across Oviraptorosaurs indicates that they did not all eat exactly the same thing. A clade can contain specialists without sharing one menu. In the dry habitats of the Geoducta Formation, seasonal resources would reward flexibility. Seeds and tough plant parts could persist after softer leaves declined. Insects emerged after rain. Small lizards, mammals, and young dinosaurs moved through vegetation and dune margins. Carcasses offered temporary abundance. Nests of other animals existed as well. An omnivore able to switch between these resources might survive conditions that punished a strict feeder. Plant life was limited compared with a humid forest, but not absent. Roots stabilized patches of ground. Low shrubs and drought-tolerant plants grew around channels and interdune hollows. Conifers may have stood where water remained accessible. The fossil record of the formation is dominated by vertebrates and sediment rather than lush plant beds, so every leaf in a reconstruction should be treated cautiously. This was not a bare ocean of sand, and it was not a green jungle. Rain changed the landscape quickly. A dry channel could carry water for a few hours, cutting into banks and leaving fresh mud. Tracks accumulated at the margins before the surface hardened again. Small animals emerged to drink. Larger dinosaurs followed the temporary line of vegetation. For an oviraptorid, such places offered food and nesting material, but also concentrated predators in the same narrow space. The most famous predator in this ecosystem is Velociraptor. The real animal was smaller than its cinematic version, roughly the length of a large turkey from hip to head, with a long tail extending behind. It carried a raised sickle claw on each foot and feathers over much of the body. An adult oviraptor would not have been helpless against it, but a nest full of eggs or newly hatched young created vulnerability. A guarding adult could use its beak, hands, and feet. The curved hand claws were not decorative. A kick from a strong hind limb could injure a smaller attacker. The beak may have pinched with considerable force, yet leaving the clutch to pursue a threat exposed eggs on the opposite side. Nest defense is often a compromise between aggression and remaining in position. Small mammals posed a different danger. Cretaceous mammals in the Gobi were generally modest in size. Many adapted for nocturnal movement and burrowing. They would not challenge an adult, but some may have taken eggs or hatchlings when opportunity allowed. Lizards, snakes if present in the local community, and small theropods could do the same. A nest guarded against many quiet threats, not one dramatic enemy. Protoceratops shared the landscape in abundance. It walked on four limbs, carried a deep beak, and bore a broad frill behind the skull. Adults were about the size of a large sheep, though body estimates vary. Herding behavior is often suggested, but the evidence supports at least repeated association in some settings rather than one permanent social system. Its nests and young added another layer to the ecosystem that originally confused Oviraptor's story. The two dinosaurs may have met often without interacting. They sought some of the same water sources and moved across the same dune fields. Protoceratops cropped low vegetation. Oviraptor searched among plants, sediment, and animal remains. One left abundant bones, the other a much rarer skeleton. Their unequal fossil record made it easy to assign every mysterious egg to the commoner animal. Other Oviraptorosaurs lived in late Cretaceous Asia, sometimes in the same broad regions. Con was smaller and more lightly crested. Psittapati was larger, with a tall crest in at least one species and some of the finest brooding fossils. Conchoraptor had a lower skull profile. Nemegtomea occupied somewhat different deposits and is also known in association with a nest. The group was not a single repeated design. Their differences likely reduced direct competition. One species may have favored harder foods. Another may have taken more plant material. Body size changed which prey, seeds, or stems could be handled. Beak shape altered the point at which force was applied. Crests may have prevented confusion during courtship. Even in an environment that looks sparse in the rock record, ecological space could be divided with precision. Oviraptor's legs suggest an active terrestrial animal. The shin and foot were elongated enough for efficient walking and bursts of speed. It was not built like an ambush predator with enormous jaws, nor like a heavy herbivore that relied on bulk. It could cross open ground rapidly, hold its head above low vegetation, and change direction with the tail balancing the body. The tail was shorter than in many earlier theropods, but remained muscular at the base. It helped stabilize the hips during running and may have supported a feather fan. Studies of some Oviraptorosaur tails suggest strong flexibility and enlarged muscle attachments, consistent with deliberate display. A living animal could have raised, lowered, or spread the fan while moving around another individual. Courtship is almost entirely invisible, yet the anatomy makes display difficult to ignore. Crest, wings, and tail fan formed three separate visual surfaces. An adult could present them while facing, turning, or circling. Colors may have intensified with age or season. Calls may have accompanied the movement, generated through soft tissues that do not fossilize. None can be reconstructed exactly, but a silent gray animal is no more conservative than a colorful one if both lack direct evidence. The inner ear and brain case of Oviraptorosaurs suggest alert animals with senses suited to active movement. Vision likely mattered for navigating open terrain, recognizing displays, and locating small food items. Hearing would detect approaching feet, calls, and the low movement of wind-disturbed vegetation. Smell is harder to estimate precisely. The skull's air spaces shaped the head, but do not reveal a simple ranking of senses. Breathing followed the efficient archosaur system inherited across theropod dinosaurs. Air sacs probably extended beyond the lungs and into parts of the skeleton, helping move air in one direction through respiratory tissues. These structures also lightened some bones. Oviraptor was not a mammal wearing feathers. Its physiology and anatomy came from a separate evolutionary history, one that living birds still carry. Body temperature was likely elevated and internally regulated to a meaningful degree, though not necessarily identical to that of a modern chicken. Eggshell isotope studies on Oviraptorids have produced estimates in a range below many living birds, but above surrounding conditions in some settings. The exact value varied among species, size, and environment. What matters for the nest is that the adult itself could contribute heat rather than acting only as a roof. Feathers provided insulation, making sustained internal warmth more useful. A small or medium-sized theropod loses heat faster than a giant dinosaur because it has more surface area relative to volume. Covering the body reduces that loss. The same feathers that kept an adult warm at night could trap warmth over eggs, especially when air temperatures fell after sunset across an open desert. Daytime created the opposite challenge. Sunlight on exposed shell can drive temperatures beyond a safe range. A parent shading the nest may have been protecting embryos from overheating rather than merely warming them. Modern ground nesting birds shift posture, stand over eggs, wet plumage, or turn their bodies to manage heat. Oviraptorids may have used their own solutions, limited by the fixed arrangement of the clutch. Attendance, therefore, may have changed hour by hour. At dawn, the adult settles low. As sunlight strengthens, it lifts enough to allow airflow while keeping the wings extended. During a cool night, plumage closes around the ring. After rain, the parent prevents wet sediment from filling the nest center. This reconstruction is plausible because it solves real physical problems, but the exact sequence remains an informed possibility. Feeding while attending a nest would require departure or help. A single adult could leave briefly during favorable temperatures, returning before the clutch cooled or overheated. Two adults could alternate, as many birds do, though no fossil pair has been found performing that exchange. The sex of brooding Oviraptorid specimens is generally uncertain, and claims of exclusively male care remain debated. Some studies have compared clutch volume with adult body size, and proposed that males may have attended eggs laid by more than one female, similar to reproductive systems in certain living birds. Other researchers caution that body mass estimates, clutch completeness, and sex identification are too uncertain for a firm conclusion. The fossils support parental attendance. They do not yet reveal a universal family arrangement. Communal nesting is also possible in some Oviraptorosaurs. Chemical differences among eggs in a clutch have been interpreted as evidence that not every pair came from the same female, though this remains an area of active study. Several adults might have laid in a shared structure, or one male might have guarded a combined clutch. Such systems exist in living birds, but there is no reason to assume an exact match. Even the word guardian requires care. It describes an adult staying with eggs, but it can imply conscious devotion in a human sense. Natural selection does not need an animal to understand inheritance. Individuals whose nesting behavior produced more surviving young left more descendants. Over countless generations, body posture, nest geometry, and defensive responses became linked into a reproductive strategy. That strategy carried costs. Time on the nest reduced feeding. A stationary adult became easier for predators to locate. Feathers accumulated dust, muscles stiffened, water had to be found. If the clutch failed, weeks of investment vanished. The fact that adults repeatedly remained over nests means the benefits outweighed those costs often enough for the behavior to persist. The most intimate fossil behavior is therefore also an economic problem of energy and risk. Every egg contained nutrients drawn from the parent. Every shell required calcium. Every day of attendance consumed reserves that could have supported growth or another clutch. Reproduction succeeded only when the ancient desert supplied enough food, time, and shelter to carry the cycle through. Oviraptor was not defined by the moment of burial. It spent most of its life away from eggs, walking, feeding, resting, avoiding danger, and interacting with others. Yet the nest is where the fossil record sees it most clearly. The irony is complete. The evidence once used to reduce the animal to a thief is the same evidence that now reveals the breadth of its life. The path from living nest to museum specimen began with burial, but burial alone was not enough. Most nests disappear. Wind scatters shell, rain dissolves or transports it, roots break through the clutch, scavengers carry pieces away. Even when sediment covers the site, groundwater may destroy bone before minerals stabilize it. Fossilization is not a normal end to life, it is a narrow exception. At Bain Zak, fine sand entered spaces between bones and eggs. The organic tissues decayed, leaving cavities and chemical conditions in which minerals could replace or fill parts of the original structure. Shell, already mineralized in life, survived more readily than skin or feather. Bone compressed under later sediment. The skull fractured. Joints shifted slightly. The finished fossil became a damaged record of an undamaged moment. Millions of years added more sediment above it. The basin subsided and changed. Layers hardened into sandstone. Continents continued moving, climates shifted, and the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous. The nest remained underground through all of it, isolated from the surface until erosion began removing the rock that protected it. Wind exposed the formation grain by grain. Frost widened cracks. Rare rain carried loose material downslope. Eventually, shell reached daylight. Had erosion continued for a few more seasons without discovery, the eggs might have broken apart completely. Paleontology often depends on arriving after nature has revealed a fossil, but before nature destroys it. The 1920s expeditions worked under conditions far removed from a modern laboratory. Teams traveled with motor vehicles, camels, fuel, plaster, crates, photographic equipment, and weeks of provisions. A fossil found in remote Mongolia had to be mapped, excavated, protected, transported across difficult terrain, and then shipped over great distances. Every successful specimen was also a logistical achievement. The expeditions were part of a period when American and European institutions removed large quantities of fossils and cultural material from regions where political power and scientific resources were unequal. The work produced major discoveries, but its history cannot be separated from those conditions. Modern Mongolian paleontology is not an extension of the old expeditions. It is a scientific tradition with its own institutions, researchers, field programs, and authority over the country's fossil heritage. Later joint expeditions changed the structure of collaboration. Mongolian and international teams worked together, and important specimens remained part of Mongolian collections even when prepared or studied across institutions. Fossil smuggling has continued to threaten the record, especially when spectacular skeletons or eggs enter private markets without locality data. A fossil separated from its geological context loses much of its scientific meaning. An egg sold as an object can display shell and shape, but it may no longer reveal its exact layer, orientation, neighboring bones, sediment type, or relationship to other eggs. Those details are what transformed the Oviraptor story. The scientific value was not simply that eggs existed. It was that one kind of egg occurred with a particular embryo and that adults repeatedly occupied a particular position above similar clutches. Context begins before excavation. Researchers photograph the surface, mark the compass direction, record the angle of each egg, and study the sediment beneath and around the nest. Plaster jackets protect blocks for transport, but preparation later exposes only selected surfaces. Computed tomography can reveal bones inside an egg without removing the shell, allowing embryos to be mapped before a tool touches the specimen. The embryo announced in 1994 was a small body inside a familiar shape. Its skull carried a short face and toothless beak characteristic of Oviraptorosaurs. That identification overturned the old Protoceratops assignment because an embryo is far stronger evidence of egg ownership than the abundance of adult bones nearby. A shell cannot wander far from the animal developing inside it. The discovery also showed how long a mistaken egg identity can survive. The original assignment had been repeated for roughly 70 years, not because later scientists refused to question it, but because the required evidence was absent. Many fossil eggs are named through an independent system based on shell shape and microscopic structure precisely because the layer cannot usually be identified. These egg parataxa are useful. A clutch can be compared across sites even when no adult skeleton is present. Patterns of pores, ornament, thickness, and crystal structure distinguish one shell type from another. Yet a shell name is not automatically a dinosaur name. The connection becomes secure only when embryos, hatchlings, or repeated adult associations bridge the two records. Oviraptorid eggs often carry linear ridges along the outer surface. Under magnification, the shell reveals layers of calcite crystals arranged during formation in the oviduct. Pore canals pass through them. Damage after burial can fill those canals with minerals, so researchers must separate original microstructure from geological alteration. A thin slice of shell can preserve reproductive biology at a scale invisible to the naked eye. Pigment evidence has added another detail. Some Oviraptorid eggs contained chemical traces consistent with blue-green coloration. Egg color is common in modern birds, but rare among other living reptiles, and its presence in non-avian dinosaurs pushes parts of that biology deeper into theropod history. The original shade would have depended on concentration, shell texture, and preservation. It should not be reconstructed as one exact modern color. Why color eggs in a nest partly exposed to air? Pigment can provide camouflage, strengthen shell in some contexts, or function within reproductive signaling. Blue-green eggs in living birds are associated with several different systems, and no single explanation transfers automatically to Oviraptorids. The important point is that the eggs may not have looked like pale museum replicas. They were biological surfaces shaped by selection. A fresh egg also had membranes, moisture, and a slight sheen. Its shell was not stone. Gas moved through pores. The embryo's blood vessels spread beneath the interior. As development proceeded, calcium from the shell contributed to the growing skeleton, gradually altering the barrier that protected it. Incubation was a chemical and physiological process, not merely an adult sitting still. Growth lines in embryonic bones may estimate age, but incubation length remains difficult to calculate. Studies of non-avian dinosaur embryos suggest periods longer than those of similarly sized modern bird eggs, perhaps closer to an intermediate physiology. Oviraptorids may have required many weeks or several months, depending on egg size and temperature. Every extra day increased exposure to nest failure. Drought could prevent adults from maintaining condition. Heavy rain could flood low nests. A sand collapse could bury the parent. Predators could remove one egg at a time without destroying the entire clutch. Embryos could fail for developmental reasons invisible in the shell. In a large clutch, some losses may have been expected. Reproductive success did not require every egg to hatch. Large clutch size spreads risk. If an adult invested in 20 eggs and only a portion survived, enough young might still enter the population to maintain the lineage. Producing many eggs, however, required either a long laying sequence or contributions from multiple females. The circular architecture records repeated additions, but the time between those additions is uncertain. A modern hen forms a shelled egg through a complex sequence of ovulation, membrane deposition, calcification, and laying. Oviraptorids followed the same broad amniote requirements while retaining two active reproductive tracts. Each pair may have been produced nearly together. The animal could not complete the entire clutch in one event. Nest building and laying unfolded across days, perhaps longer. During that period, the earliest eggs already faced environmental temperatures. If embryos began development before the clutch was complete, the inner ring gained a head start. If development paused until sustained attendance, differences might have been reduced. Fossil embryos at unequal stages suggest that perfect synchrony was not guaranteed, though the reasons remain unresolved. The adult's return to the center may have followed each laying episode. It could shade the existing eggs between additions, then rise to deposit the next pair. Such a sequence would explain why nest attendance mattered before a full clutch existed. It also means the familiar brooding posture may have been repeated many times rather than adopted only at the end. Tracks around a nest would answer some of these questions, but they are rarely preserved with the eggs. Loose dune sand records feet poorly unless moisture binds the surface. Wind erases shallow impressions quickly. A parent may have circled the nest dozens of times without leaving one durable mark. The absence of tracks is not the absence of movement. Egg orientation provides the movement record instead. Each pointed end faces outward and downward. Each broad end angles inward. Pairs retain a consistent relationship. An animal with limited view beneath its own body created this geometry through touch, balance, and inherited behavior. The nest was built without a plan in the human sense, yet its structure was reliable enough to recur across generations. Behavior can fossilize as pattern. A beaver dam preserves decisions in wood placement. A termite mound preserves airflow control. A dinosaur clutch preserves the order and direction of laying. The body over it preserves a final posture. Neither needs a footprint or a brain to reveal that the animal followed a sequence. That sequence links Oviraptor more closely to birds than early researchers could have imagined. When the genus was named, birds were accepted by many scientists as related to dinosaurs, but the details of that relationship remained debated and poorly illustrated. Feathered non-avian dinosaurs were unknown. Brooding postures had not been documented. The nest looked reptilian because the category of dinosaur itself was still imagined as reptile first. Modern birds are surviving theropods. Their nests do not make Oviraptor bird-like through coincidence alone. Some shared traits come from common ancestry, while others were modified independently. Feathers, paired limbs folded around a clutch, elevated metabolism, and complex eggs all developed across a branching history. Oviraptorids preserve one combination along that history, not a direct step leading straight to any living species. They were cousins of the lineage that produced birds, not ancestors of chickens or ostriches. Their unusual beaks, crests, and clutch architecture were their own evolutionary experiment. When they disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous, that experiment ended. Birds survived with different bodies and reproductive strategies, carrying only the traits inherited from deeper common ancestors. This distinction prevents the nest from becoming a simple progress story. Evolution does not aim toward the present. Oviraptorids were not rehearsing modern bird behavior. They were successful dinosaurs, solving their own problems in late Cretaceous environments. Similarities with birds matter because they reveal shared foundations, while differences matter because they show how many outcomes those foundations could produce. The fossil at Bain Jac therefore sits at several boundaries. It lies between anatomy and behavior, between historical error and later correction, between buried reptile-style eggs and open bird-like attendants, and between the animal's actual identity and the meaning imposed by its name. Each boundary became visible only after more evidence accumulated. In the museum, the specimen is stable. In science, it is still active. New work on nest heat transfer, eggshell chemistry, growth, and Oviraptorosaur relationships continues to adjust the reconstruction. The large reversal has already happened, but smaller revisions will continue. A guardian is more likely than a thief. Exactly how that guardian incubated, fed, displayed, and raised its young remains open to discovery. Oviraptor belongs to Oviraptorosauria, a branch of Maniraptoran theropods that appeared earlier in the Cretaceous and spread across Asia and North America. The earliest members looked different from the deep-skulled animals of the Gobi. Some still carried teeth at the front of the jaws. Others were small, long-legged, and lightly built. Through time, the group experimented with beaks, crests, body size, and diet while retaining a recognizable core anatomy. One of the clearest early forms is Caudipteryx from northeastern China. It was roughly turkey-sized, with short jaws, some teeth, long legs, and unmistakable feathers on the arms and tail. The feather arrangement was too small for flight and likely served display, insulation, or both. Caudipteryx lived tens of millions of years before Oviraptor, showing that elaborate plumage entered the group long before the famous Gobi nests were made. Another early member, Incisivosaurus, carried prominent front teeth unlike the toothless beaks of later Oviraptorids. Its skull suggests a feeding system not yet transformed into the compact, powerful apparatus seen in Oviraptor. These animals demonstrate that the group did not appear fully formed. Features accumulated in different combinations, and some lineages retained older structures while others became more specialized. By the late Cretaceous, two major branches dominated the advanced Oviraptorosaurs. Oviraptorids were especially diverse in Asia. Canagnathids occurred in Asia and North America and included animals ranging from modest size to the enormous Gigantoraptor. Their lower jaws and limb proportions differed, but both branches shared the basic toothless, feathered, two-legged form. Gigantoraptor shows how far the body plan could be stretched. It reached several tons, far larger than Oviraptor, yet retained long limbs, a beaked head, and Oviraptorosaur ancestry. Its existence complicates any single ecological label. A group once imagined as small egg specialists produced one of the largest feathered theropods known. Whatever Gigantoraptor ate, it could not have lived by quietly raiding a few nests. Size also changed nesting mechanics. A heavier adult could not settle over a small, compact clutch in the same way as Chittapati. Giant Oviraptorosaur eggs occur in broad rings with a large central opening, allowing the adult to place its body weight away from the shells. Nest diameter increased more rapidly than egg size, preserving space for the parent while keeping eggs within reach of long, feathered arms. This relationship between adult mass and nest architecture appears across the group. Smaller species made tighter clutches. Larger species left wider centers. The pattern supports brooding because the empty middle scales with the animal expected to occupy it. If the nests were simply buried and abandoned, there would be less reason for the ring to accommodate an adult body so consistently. Oviraptor itself falls on the smaller side of that range. Its tight material is insufficient for a perfectly measured body, but close relatives indicate an animal manageable enough to cover a compact clutch. It did not need the enormous open center of a giant canagnatheid. The eggs beside the specimen fit the dimensions expected for an Oviraptorid scale parent. The group's geographic spread followed changing Cretaceous landscapes. Asia and North America were periodically connected through high-latitude land routes. Dinosaur populations moved across those connections when climate and sea level permitted. Canagnathids in western North America became part of ecosystems later dominated by tyrannosaurs, hadrosaurs, and ceratopsians, while Asian oviraptorids diversified in environments ranging from dry dune fields to wetter river systems. Oviraptor lived within one portion of that broader history. It is tempting to describe the entire group through the famous genus, but the name has become larger than the animal. Oviraptorosaur is the inclusive term for the whole branch. Oviraptorid refers to a more restricted family. Oviraptor Velociraptor is one species, known from one main specimen and additional material that has often been disputed or reassigned. That scarcity matters when estimating behavior. A single species can differ from its relatives. Modern birds all lay eggs, but albatrosses, cuckoos, megapodes, and penguins do not share one nesting strategy. Brooding fossils from Chittapati and other oviraptorids make nest attendance strongly likely across parts of the family. They do not prove that every species behaved identically in every climate. The title egg guardian therefore rests on a careful scale of confidence. Oviraptor was associated with a clutch of Oviraptorid-type eggs. Close relatives repeatedly preserve brooding postures over comparable nests. The group possessed feathers and body proportions suited to covering those clutches. Taken together, guarding or attending its own nest is far better supported than raiding a Protoceratops nest. Whether Oviraptor occasionally ate eggs is a separate question. Many living nest guardians will consume eggs under other circumstances. Gulls protect their own clutches and take the eggs of neighbors. Monitor lizards raid nests while also defending their own reproductive opportunities. Omnivory allows behavior to change with context. Correcting the old story does not require declaring eggs impossible food. No fossil should be forced into moral innocence. Theft and care are human categories placed onto survival behavior. An animal could defend one clutch and exploit another. It could scavenge a broken egg without being specialized for egg predation. The important correction is evidential. The type specimen does not demonstrate that its final act was eating Protoceratops eggs. The beak's strength remains relevant because nest construction, feeding, and display all begin at the head. A keratin sheath would have extended beyond the preserved bone and changed the profile of the mouth. Like a bird beak, it grew continuously and wore against food. Small chips or scratches could repair as new keratin formed, leaving little trace on the skeleton. Keratin may also have enlarged the crest. Bone provides the core, not always the finished outline. Cassowaries carry keratin over a bony casque, while hornbills support large hollow structures above the beak. Oviraptor's crest could have appeared taller, smoother, or more colorful than the fossil surface suggests. Without preserved soft tissue, Every restoration should leave room for variation. The skull's internal spaces may have influenced resonance. Some crested dinosaurs used elongated nasal passages to shape calls, but Oviraptor's anatomy does not provide the same clear acoustic tube seen in Lambeosaurine hadrosaurs. A crest might still affect sound indirectly or support tissues involved in display. Claims of a specific call go beyond the evidence. Its voice likely came from a bird-like or crocodilian foundation rather than mammalian vocal cords. Living birds produce sound with a syrinx lower in the airway, while crocodilians use the laryngeal region. The exact vocal organ of non-avian Oviraptorosaurs is unknown. They may have hissed, boomed, clucked, or made low-frequency calls, but the fossil record does not preserve a reliable vocabulary. Communication around a nesting area would be useful. Adults needed to recognize mates, rivals, and threats. Chicks, if they remained near the nest, benefited from contact calls. Visual signals could fail at night or behind dunes. Even a simple low call would travel through open terrain farther than a small body could be seen. The Gobi soundscape contained more than dinosaur voices. Wind moved constantly across exposed surfaces. Sand struck dry stems. Insects emerged near water. Small mammals rustled after dark. Pterosaurs may have passed overhead. The absence of modern songbirds would make the morning unfamiliar, though early birds were present elsewhere in the Cretaceous and may have occupied parts of Central Asia. Oviraptor's feathered body would also make sound. Display feathers rustled when raised. Claws scraped sediment. The beak clicked against hard food, or another beak. Footsteps on loose sand were muted, but movement across crusted ground left sharper impacts. These details do not require theatrical monsters. They return the animal to a scale where individual motion matters. At rest, the long hind limbs folded beneath the body. Theropod trackways and resting traces from other species show that many dinosaurs could crouch with the metatarsus approaching the ground. Oviraptorids on nests demonstrate an even more controlled posture. The feet were placed inside the clutch without disrupting the eggs, and the body remained balanced over a narrow center. Rising from that position required care. The adult shifted weight forward, lifted the hips, and unfolded one leg without striking the inner ring. Wings could extend for balance. The tail adjusted behind. A careless movement risked breaking an egg, so selection favored precise motor control around the nest. This was behavior learned through instinct and possibly refined through experience. First-time breeders may have been less successful. Living animals often improve nest construction, egg placement, and defense with age. Fossils cannot identify experience in a skeleton, but differences among clutch organization could partly reflect individual skill rather than species alone. A nearly perfect ring may represent a practiced adult. A disordered clutch may preserve disturbance, poor construction, or deformation after burial. Not every adult clutch association ended in catastrophe at the same stage. Some nests contain advanced embryos. Others show no visible embryo, perhaps because development was early or preservation failed. Some adults lie directly over eggs, others are incomplete or shifted. The repeated posture is strong evidence, but each specimen records a different point in a reproductive cycle. Together, they create a sequence no single fossil can show. Empty ring structures reveal laying. Embryos reveal ownership and development. Adults reveal attendance. Hatchling remains suggest what emerged. Eggshell chemistry records color and temperature. Bone histology records growth. The life of Oviraptor is reconstructed by placing those separate fragments into an order that remains open to revision. That order begins before the nest, with maturity and display, and continues through construction, paired laying, attendance, hatching, and whatever care followed. The old egg thief occupied only a few imagined seconds. The egg guardian occupies weeks or months. Scientific correction has not merely changed the verdict, it has expanded the amount of life we can see. A nesting season in the Jadakta landscape may have begun with weather rather than a date. Rainfall was irregular. A brief wet interval could soften the ground, renew plants, and increase insects and small prey. Adults in better condition produced eggs. The same moisture that made food more available also made sediment easier to shape. A nest built too early faced scarcity. One built too late risked heat or the return of dry winds. Near an interdune hollow, an adult tests the surface with its feet. The ground is firm below and loose above, high enough to avoid the first runoff, but close enough to vegetation for cover. It scrapes backward, turning as it works. Hands pull at the rim. The result is not a deep bowl. It is a low structure organized around the space where the animal's body will later rest. No fossil identifies whether the builder was male or female. The laying animal had to visit, but construction and attendance could involve either sex or both. Modern analogies offer many possibilities and no decisive answer. The scene is best kept anonymous at first, an adult shaping sediment, because the inherited sequence of reproduction has begun. The first pair of eggs enters the inner ring. Each is long, tapered, and heavy with fluid. The pointed ends settle outward into the substrate. Broad ends angle toward the hollow. The adult shifts its feet and adds another pair after the next interval of shell formation. Slowly, the ring closes. Nothing about the process is hurried. The final symmetry is created through repetition. Between laying events, the adult remains nearby or returns after feeding. Direct sun reaches the exposed ends. A body above them changes the temperature immediately. Feathers reduce airflow. Shadow moves across the clutch. At night, warm tissue and trapped air slow cooling. The adult does not need to achieve the uniform heat of a modern bird to improve the embryo's chances. As more pairs are added, the nest rises. Sediment supports the lower eggs and separates them from the next ring. The structure gains capacity but loses simplicity. Heat will not reach every shell equally. Some eggs begin development earlier. Others occupy warmer positions. The clutch becomes a record of sequence, with time arranged from the center outward. Embryos begin as discs of cells on the surface of yolk. Their bodies fold, organs form, and blood vessels spread against membranes beneath the shell. Calcium moves from shell into bone. The skull develops around large eyes. Limbs lengthen. Feathers may begin as follicles before hatching, preparing the young for a world where temperature changes quickly after sunset. Outside, the adult continues feeding. It uses the beak to clip a tough plant stem, then turns loose sediment with one foot. A beetle larva appears beneath the crust. Later it finds the remains of a small animal exposed near a channel. Omnivory, if that was its strategy, supplies protein, minerals, and energy from whatever the season offers. Calcium is especially important during egg production. Shelling a large clutch draws heavily on stored reserves and dietary intake. Living birds can temporarily reduce bone density as calcium moves into shells. Non-avian dinosaurs likely faced comparable physiological demands. A female producing repeated pairs required food rich enough to replace what each laying episode removed. If several females contributed to one clutch, those demands were distributed. If one female laid the entire ring system, the process required sustained condition over many days. Both models remain possible for at least some Oviraptorosaurs. The geometry tells us how eggs were added, not how many individuals added them. Another adult approaches. Crests and feather fans make identity visible at a distance. The resident rises, wings slightly extended. The interaction could be courtship, relief at the nest, or a territorial challenge. Fossils preserve none of the outcome. Yet a nesting site almost certainly drew social behavior because eggs concentrated reproductive value in one exposed place. The old image would interpret any second Oviraptorid as a thief. The revised evidence does not justify the opposite assumption. Competition within a species can be severe. Adults may destroy rival eggs, take over nests, or steal nesting space in many living animals. A guardian protects against members of its own kind, as well as against other predators. For most of the day, danger is less visible. Dehydration builds gradually. Wind strips moisture from exposed membranes if shell pores lose too much water. Sediment around the pointed ends helps regulate that loss. Too much burial would reduce oxygen. Too little would increase drying. The chosen depth is a compromise written into shell porosity and egg angle. A small lizard enters the rim after dark. It is not large enough to open an intact egg, but broken shell, insects, and nest debris offer food. The adult detects movement and shifts one hand. Claws touch the surface. The lizard retreats. Many acts of defense end this way, without combat, leaving no injury for bone to record. A larger threat arrives as footprints before it becomes a body. 3 toed impressions cross damp ground toward the hollow. The adult hears or feels the approach and rises. If the visitor is a small theropod, display may be enough. Wings spread beyond their resting width. Tail feathers lift. The crest turns side on. The guardian appears larger than its skeleton alone. A direct attack risks both animals. The intruder can be wounded by beak and claws. The parent can be drawn away from the clutch. Natural selection often favors hesitation when the cost of testing an opponent is high. The tracks veer aside. By morning, wind has softened their edges, and within days the evidence disappears completely. Not all threats withdraw. A sand-laden gust grows into sustained wind. Grains climb the outer rim and spill toward the center. The adult lowers its body and closes feathers over the exposed eggs. Its nostrils remain above the surface. Fine dust enters plumage and eyes. The nest survives because the guardian acts as a living barrier. A stronger event could become fatal. Dune faces fail when wind, gravity, or moisture destabilizes them. Sand moves downslope in a dense sheet, fast enough to overwhelm an animal before it stands. Other Gobi fossils preserve bodies interpreted as victims of collapsing dunes or sandstorms. A brooding adult, committed to a low posture, may have had little warning. The famous skeleton's death cannot be replayed with certainty. The sediment around it records burial, not a witnessed cause. A collapsing dune is plausible. A storm deposit is plausible. Sudden entombment is consistent with articulated bones and close association. The responsible narration leaves alternatives open, while recognizing that gradual exposure would probably have scattered the scene. Imagine the first pressure of sand against the feathers. The adult rises halfway, then more sediment enters from one side. Wings that covered the clutch now brace against the flow. Eggs remain held by the nest wall. The body turns, perhaps attempting to climb. Within moments, the open center fills. Breath becomes impossible. The posture that preserved the nest also helps preserve the parent. This is an image, not a fact recovered in every detail. No fossil records the animal's final thought or exact movement, yet taphonomy permits a physical sequence. Rapid sediment arrives. The skeleton stays largely together. Eggs retain arrangement. Decay begins under cover. The scene enters the geological record because burial is fast enough to defeat the processes that normally erase it. Other nests complete the story without adults. One clutch may have hatched successfully, leaving shell fragments and an empty center. Another may have been abandoned after the parent died elsewhere. A third may have been buried so early that embryos never formed. The fossil record collects success and failure indiscriminately, then exposes only a tiny selection. For a successful clutch, the first internal movement against shell marks a different crisis. The embryo has consumed much of the yolk. Its skeleton is mineralized enough to push. It rotates toward the air cell at the blunt end. Breathing shifts as membranes break. The beak, or a temporary hardened tip, strikes the shell from inside. A small crack becomes a line. Moisture escapes. The hatchling rests, then pushes again. Because the egg is angled inward, The opening faces the nest center rather than the outer wall. That orientation may have given the young a clearer route out. Pieces fall onto sediment instead of trapping the body beneath the pointed end. The first hatchling emerges while other eggs remain closed. Its feathers are damp and flattened. Legs fold awkwardly after confinement. The adult adjusts without leaving the clutch, making space in the center. If the young were precocial, they could stand within hours. If less developed, they remained beneath the parent. Both possibilities demand some degree of coordination around the fixed eggs. Calls would help a hatchling announce itself before breaking free. Modern crocodilian young vocalize from inside eggs, stimulating adults and siblings. Bird embryos also produce sounds and respond to one another. Oviraptorid communication within the clutch is unknown, but sensory systems develop before hatching in living archosaurs. The nest may have become audible before it became active. Asynchronous development means the process repeats. One chick dries while another opens the shell. Earlier young may step among broad egg ends or occupy the central hollow. The adult cannot turn the remaining eggs out of the way because their pointed ends are embedded. Nest architecture that helped support incubation now constrains the hatchling's movement. The parent could remove shell fragments with its beak. Many birds clean nests, reducing sharp debris and visual cues for predators. No fossil shows an Oviraptorid carrying shell, but the beak and hands were capable of it. Alternatively, fragments simply accumulated in the center and were scattered when the family left. Both outcomes would produce different traces, easily altered by wind. Food becomes urgent once yolk reserves decline. Precocial young may forage for insects and small plant items near the nest. A more dependent chick requires provisioning. The adult's broad beak could carry multiple small objects, but lacked the fine tooth grip of a meat-eating theropod. Soft food, torn pieces, or regurgitated material are possibilities, none preserved. Growth would be rapid during favorable seasons. Bone histology in dinosaurs often records high juvenile growth rates, though species differ. Young Oviraptorosaurs had to reach a size that reduced predation risk before conditions worsened. Feathers supported temperature control, while long legs allowed early mobility. Crests developed later as social maturity approached. Juveniles may have traveled with adults or formed groups with others of similar age. Trackways and bone beds can reveal such behavior in some dinosaurs, but clear Oviraptorid family trails are rare. The Gobi record favors sudden burial of individual bodies and nests rather than continuous surfaces covered in tracks. What happened after departure remains one of the largest gaps. The nest itself persisted for a while. Wind filled the center. Rain collapsed the rim. Eggshell fragments moved downslope. Within a season, the structure could vanish from the living landscape. Only rapid burial could keep its geometry. A successful nursery and a failed nest might become almost indistinguishable once surface processes began. For this reason, the adult over eggs is unusually powerful evidence. It catches the behavior before wind dismantles it. The animal's final position connects anatomy to architecture. Long arms align with the clutch edge. Folded legs match the central hollow. Feathers, inferred from relatives, explain coverage. The nest and body solve one another. Across many nesting seasons, the behavior continued because enough clutches survived. Individual adults failed. Eggs overheated. Dunes collapsed. Predators succeeded. Yet populations endured across millions of years. The repeated ring of eggs was not a fragile curiosity. It was a working reproductive system, tested against one of the Cretaceous world's harshest environments. The misunderstanding came from seeing only the fatal end. An animal dead across eggs resembles a raider caught in the act when the living sequence is missing. Restore the days of construction, laying, shading, defense, and development, and the same arrangement changes meaning. The skeleton does not become sentimental. It becomes complete enough to understand. When the embryo evidence appeared, popular language changed faster than taxonomy. Articles announced that the egg thief had been cleared. Museum displays began showing feathered adults on nests. Illustrators replaced stolen Protoceratops eggs with rings of the animal's own clutch. The reversal was satisfying because it resembled a solved mystery, but science had not delivered a courtroom verdict. It had changed the most likely interpretation. The original eggs were never opened to reveal an embryo from the exact clutch. The type skeleton remains incomplete. Similarity of egg form, locality, and adult posture across relatives provides the case. That case is strong enough to reject the old confident accusation, yet careful wording still matters. Oviraptor was probably attending a nest of its own kind or a closely related Oviraptorid. Popular reconstructions often collapse Oviraptor and Sittipati into one animal. A tall crest, complete feathered body, and classic brooding pose are placed beneath the older name. This creates a visually coherent dinosaur, but it hides which fossils supply which details. Oviraptor provides the famous association and name. Sittipati provides much of the complete nesting skeleton. Other Oviraptorosaurs provide feather impressions, tail anatomy, embryos, and large clutches. Composite reconstruction is normal in paleontology. Most extinct animals are not known from one perfect individual. Missing bones are restored using close relatives, mirrored elements, and biomechanical constraints. The problem arises only when certainty is not marked. A useful image can show the probable body while acknowledging that the exact crest or feather arrangement is inferred. Taxonomy makes the picture more complicated because names change as new specimens are compared. Material once assigned to Oviraptor has been moved to other genera. The tall crested skull, long used in restorations, is now associated with Sittipati rather than the Oviraptor type. Some isolated bones cannot be identified below the family level. Scientific names are hypotheses about relationships, not labels attached by nature. Oviraptor Velociraptor remains valid because the type specimen carries a distinct combination of features, but its incompleteness limits diagnosis. Future finds from the same formation could clarify the skull, body proportions, and variation. They might also reveal that specimens currently separated belong together, or that material grouped under one name represents multiple species. Revision is not failure. It is the normal response to a growing sample. The public often meets dinosaurs through a finished silhouette. A museum mount stands with every bone in place. Skin, feathers, color, and eyes complete the animal in art. The underlying evidence is less tidy: one crushed skull, a forelimb, eggs, comparisons with relatives, and layers of uncertainty. The task is to make that uncertainty visible without making knowledge seem impossible. We can be confident that Oviraptor was a small feathered theropod with a toothless beak and crest. We can be confident that Oviraptorids laid elongated eggs in organized ring-shaped clutches. We can be confident that several Oviraptorids attended nests in a bird-like posture. We can be confident that the historic eggs were misidentified as Protoceratops on insufficient evidence. We are less certain about Oviraptor's exact plumage, color, crest outline, diet, mating system, sex roles, incubation temperature, and post-hatching care. Those are not minor decorative details. They are much of the living animal. Paleontology narrows possibilities rather than restoring every moment. The result can still be vivid because physical constraints give the scene weight. Nest thermodynamics is a good example. Earlier discussion often presented brooding as direct proof of bird-style incubation. More recent studies test how heat would move through a realistic multi-ring clutch. Some experiments indicate an attending adult could warm eggs above ambient conditions. Other models show that inner eggs received less direct contact and that heat distribution was uneven compared with modern birds. The findings do not return the animal to simple reptilian burial. They suggest a mixed system. Adult attendance mattered, but its function may have included shading, reducing temperature extremes, protecting exposed shell, and adding some metabolic heat. The nest operated through adult behavior and environmental warmth together. It was neither a crocodile mound nor a robin's cup. A 2026 experimental study reconstructed oviraptorid clutch coverage and heat flow with a life-sized adult model. It found that the ring structure limited contact with every egg and likely produced less efficient incubation than in modern birds. It also reinforced the value of adult attendance in shielding eggs from dangerous environmental extremes. The interpretation continues to move toward complexity rather than a single label. This is why the phrase egg guardian is more useful than egg incubator when discussing the broad behavior. Guarding includes physical defense, shading, sheltering, and remaining in position. Incubation specifically implies managing development through heat, which likely occurred to some extent, but not with uniform efficiency. The adult's presence is the direct evidence. The exact thermal contribution is reconstructed. The eggs themselves may have been warm from several sources. Solar radiation heated exposed shell and sediment. The ground retained heat after sunset. Embryonic metabolism contributed more as development advanced. The adult transferred energy through body contact, feathers, air, and perhaps its limbs in the central cavity. Wind removed heat. Evaporation changed temperature after rain. Each factor varied across a day. A static laboratory model cannot reproduce an animal lifting feathers, shifting posture, standing briefly, or returning from shade. It also cannot know the original humidity, wind speed, or exact sediment moisture. Experiments are not reenactments. They test whether proposed mechanisms are physically possible and which constraints matter most. The same caution applies to isotope temperatures. Chemical bonds in eggshell can preserve information about formation and environmental conditions, but alteration after burial must be evaluated. Estimates carry uncertainty. A value does not reveal whether one adult remained continuously or how temperature varied across a ring. It provides another boundary for the reconstruction. Scientific progress often comes from combining imperfect methods. Anatomy shows what the body could do. Taphonomy shows how the scene formed. Eggshell porosity addresses burial depth. Isotopes address temperature. Embryos address ownership and development. Experiments address heat transfer. No line is complete, but agreement among them makes some behaviors more likely. Disagreement is equally useful. If a model shows that the adult could not contact inner eggs, the nest should not be described as identical to a bird's. If embryos show unequal development, perfectly synchronized incubation becomes less likely. The fossil does not lose value when a simple analogy fails. It reveals a reproductive strategy that has no living copy. That lack of a living copy is one reason Oviraptor was misunderstood. Humans interpret unfamiliar structures using familiar categories. A dinosaur at eggs becomes predator, or parent. A feathered arm becomes wing or display. A beak becomes herbivorous or carnivorous. The animal may occupy the space between those categories, combining functions that no modern species combines in the same way. The Cretaceous contained many such combinations. Therizinosaurs were large feathered theropods with long claws and plant-heavy diets. Dromaeosaurs carried flight-related anatomy while remaining terrestrial predators. Early birds retained teeth and clawed fingers. Oviraptorosaurs paired parrot-like heads with running legs, display feathers, and ring-shaped nests. Their world was not a set of unfinished modern animals, nor was it a collection of monsters. Oviraptor's daily concerns were recognizable biological problems: food, water, temperature, competitors, injury, mates, and offspring. Its solutions were unfamiliar because evolution had assembled different tools. A crest advertised, a beak processed varied materials, feathers insulated and covered. A circular clutch kept eggs around a weight-bearing center. The correction of the egg thief story helped change the emotional range of dinosaur science. Early popular culture emphasized combat, predation, and extinction. Nesting fossils made room for vulnerability and investment. Dinosaurs could be shown waiting, sheltering, and arranging. These behaviors did not make them gentle. They made them animals, rather than symbols of violence. Parental care had already been proposed from other dinosaur nests, including hadrosaurs, but Oviraptorids provided an especially direct posture. The arms spread across eggs in a way that could be compared bone for bone with a brooding bird. Because the adult died where it sat, the interpretation did not depend only on young bones near adults. It preserved the act of attendance itself. That visual power can also lead to overconfidence. One dramatic fossil is easy to place at the center of every claim, yet the real strength comes from repetition. 7 or more adult clutch associations have now been discussed across Oviraptorids, depending on which specimens and preservation standards are included. The posture recurs beyond one site and one species. Each additional specimen reduces the chance that transport produced the arrangement. Bodies could wash into nests by accident, but multiple adults would not repeatedly settle with folded legs in the center and arms around the rim. Taphonomy can disturb a posture. It cannot invent the same functional geometry across separate clutches. The type Oviraptor may be less complete than those later fossils, yet it was the first clue. It carried the relationship before scientists had the language to read it. The name fixed the wrong meaning, while the bones waited for comparative evidence. 70 years is long in a human career and brief in the life of a fossil interpretation. Future discoveries may refine the story again. A new Oviraptor skeleton could preserve feathers or stomach contents. An embryo from Bain-Zach might connect exact egg morphology to the species. A nesting colony could reveal spacing between adults. A track surface might show repeated approaches. Histology could identify maturity and possibly reproductive status. None of those discoveries would erase the history already written. The egg thief would remain in the genus name, a reminder that first interpretations are provisional even when they become famous. The guardian would remain a probability supported by broader evidence. Both meanings would continue to occupy the same word. Inside a museum drawer, the shell fragment is small enough to hold between 2 fingers. Under a microscope, its pores open as dark channels. In a field photograph, the clutch expands into a ring. In the mounted reconstruction, the adult spreads feathered arms across it. Scale changes, but the relationship remains, a body organized around eggs. The most honest image is not an acquittal carved in stone. It is an animal whose behavior becomes clearer as evidence accumulates. Oviraptor does not need to be made innocent or noble. It needs to be removed from a story the fossil never proved and returned to the nest it most likely built. The nest did not exist apart from its ecosystem. Every shell depended on plants capturing sunlight, on water moving through soil, on prey and competitors sharing the same basin. To call Oviraptor an egg guardian is to describe one relationship inside a network that stretched from microscopic organisms in the sediment to the largest dinosaurs crossing the dunes. Protoceratops was one of the most visible members of that network. Its strong beak cropped low plants and perhaps dug at roots or tougher growth. Juveniles were small enough to attract predators, while adults carried a broad skull and muscular body that made attack risky. Their abundance suggests they were well suited to the dry environment, but abundance in fossils can also reflect preservation and where expeditions have searched. The famous fighting dinosaur specimen from Mongolia preserves a velociraptor and protoceratops locked together, one animal's sickle claw near the other's throat, while the ceratopsian grips the predator's arm. It demonstrates that violent encounters occurred, but it also represents a rare instant. Most individuals spent most days without being buried during combat. The surrounding ecosystem functioned through long periods of feeding, resting, and avoiding confrontation. Oviraptor occupied a different path through the same ground. Its narrower body and long hind limbs allowed movement between vegetation patches. The beak handled food without the battery of shearing teeth found in Protoceratops. It may have used resources too small, hard, or scattered for the ceratopsian. Competition existed, but coexistence suggests enough ecological separation for both lineages to persist. Ankylosaurs added armored bulk to the community. Small forms such as Pinacosaurus are known from related goby deposits, sometimes in groups of juveniles. Their low bodies and protective plates solved predation through defense rather than speed. An adult oviraptor could pass beside one without conflict, each searching for different foods along the same patch of ground. Small dromaeosaurs and troodontids hunted animals that Oviraptor might also eat. Troodontids carried many small teeth and relatively large brains for non-avian dinosaurs. Some built their own organized nests with elongated eggs partly embedded in sediment. Their reproductive biology offers another comparison, showing that complex nesting behavior evolved across several Maniraptoran branches. Early birds shared the skies and low vegetation, although their local fossil record is less conspicuous than the bones of ground-dwelling dinosaurs. Pterosaurs crossed longer distances above the basin. Neither would fill the sky with the density of modern passerines. Open air over the dunes may have seemed empty until a distant wing caught the light. Mammals remained mostly below the visual scale of the larger dinosaurs. Multituberculates carried specialized teeth for processing plant material and other foods. Insectivorous forms searched at night. Burrows provided shelter from heat and predators. These animals were not waiting passively for dinosaurs to disappear. They were diverse within small-bodied niches and contributed to seed movement, soil disturbance, and predation on eggs or invertebrates. Lizards were especially diverse at Ukah-Tolgod and nearby localities. Their delicate skulls and skeletons survived through exceptional rapid burial. Some climbed vegetation, others ran across the ground or burrowed. For an omnivorous oviraptorid, they were potential prey. For hatchlings, larger lizards were potential predators. Ecological roles changed with body size and age. Insects leave a poorer body record but were essential. Beetles processed dead wood and dung. Flies visited carcasses. Termite-like social insects may have modified soil. Pollination systems differed because flowering plants were still expanding during the late Cretaceous, while conifers and other seed plants remained important in these dry habitats. Oviraptor's beak may have encountered seeds produced by both older and newer plant groups. The Jadakta landscape is sometimes illustrated beneath an uninterrupted orange sky, but seasons brought variation. Cooler intervals changed activity. Rain darkened the sand and released smells from soil and plants. Temporary water reflected clouds. Dust storms reduced visibility. At night, temperatures dropped enough for insulation to matter. A nesting adult experienced these changes from one fixed point. It knew the landscape through repeated views over the clutch rim. A shrub bent under prevailing wind. A channel carried water after one storm and remained dry for weeks. Tracks crossed at dawn. The sun moved along the same arc while embryos developed beneath the shell. Time at the nest can be measured in small adjustments. The body turns slightly as wind shifts. One wing lifts, then lowers. A foot moves within the central hollow. The beak removes sediment from an egg end. Eyes close briefly, but the head remains responsive to movement. None of these acts would fossilize separately. An injury could change the entire season. A damaged leg made crouching difficult. A broken feather reduced coverage. Infection consumed energy needed for attendance. Fossil skeletons sometimes record healed fractures and disease, though Oviraptor's type material is too limited to reconstruct a detailed medical history. The living animal was as vulnerable to ordinary bodily failure as any animal today. Parasites likely occupied the feathers, skin, digestive tract, and nest. Modern birds spend time preening because plumage loses function when dirty or damaged. Oviraptorids probably used their beaks to align feathers and remove debris. An adult on a dusty nest had even greater need for maintenance, balancing the care of its own body against the eggs beneath it. Feather molt added a seasonal constraint. Replacing large wing or tail feathers requires nutrients and temporarily reduces display or coverage. Birds coordinate molt with breeding in many different ways. Oviraptorids may have avoided replacing major feathers during nest attendance, or they may have followed a gradual pattern. The fossils preserve mature feathers only in exceptional conditions, not the annual schedule that produced them. Water was another limit. An adult could obtain moisture from food, but prolonged heat made drinking important. Leaving the nest for a temporary pool exposed the clutch. Nest placement near water reduced travel, but increased the danger of flooding and concentrated other animals nearby. Every site reflected compromise. The parent may have selected a position with morning sun and afternoon shade from a dune or shrub. Wind direction could influence where loose sediment accumulated. Ground firmness affected drainage and the stability of egg angles. Living reptiles and birds show strong nest site preferences even when the chosen features are subtle to human observers. Repeated nests in one area can indicate favorable ground rather than social colonies. If adults return to the same dune margin over generations, egg clutches might occur at different levels within a limited deposit. Distinguishing colony behavior from repeated use through time requires precise stratigraphy. A dense fossil site does not automatically mean many parents nested side by side. Where several nests were active together, the landscape would become socially complex. Adults recognized boundaries, exchanged calls, and moved between feeding areas and clutches. Predators learned that eggs were concentrated there. Defensive displays became frequent. The benefits of many alert adults could offset the risk of attracting attention, as in modern nesting colonies. No clear colony can be assigned confidently to Oviraptor itself. The possibility belongs to the broader reproductive questions. What can be said is that suitable nesting ground was a resource. Animals competed for it, returned to it, and modified it. The clutch was not placed randomly on an endless desert. The substrate also affected preservation. A nest on a stable surface might hatch and erode away. A nest near an active dune face had a greater chance of catastrophic burial and fossilization. The record, therefore, may overrepresent dangerous nesting sites or fatal weather. What preserves behavior is not always what was most common in life. This bias changes how we read abundance. Many brooding fossils do not necessarily mean that adults often died on nests. It may mean that the posture and environment created an unusual path to preservation. A body lying over eggs formed a compact obstacle that trapped sediment. Rapid burial protected both skeleton and clutch, making a rare death disproportionately visible millions of years later. The same bias may hide successful parenting. A guardian that completed incubation, left with hatchlings, and died years later would not preserve the relationship. Its nest would lose structure. Its bones might be scattered elsewhere. Fossil behavior is often a record of interruption rather than completion. When we reconstruct the population, we have to restore the invisible majority. Adults that rose from nests, chicks that broke shell, juveniles that crossed the basin, mature animals that never fossilized. The famous specimen represents one ending, not the normal outcome of every clutch. Oviraptor survived as a lineage because most reproductive attempts were not entombed at the moment we can see. The ecosystem itself was also temporary. Over millions of years, dune positions shifted, drainage changed, and species ranges moved. The Jadakta Formation does not record one unchanging afternoon. It gathers deposits from a span of time long enough for populations and environments to vary. A reconstruction combines repeated conditions rather than photographing one exact year. Oviraptor lived near the end of the age of dinosaurs, but not at its final moment. Tens of millions of years separated the Jadakta animals from the asteroid impact. Their lives were not overshadowed by a coming extinction. The lineage had time to reproduce, diversify, and respond to local change without any knowledge of the planetary event far ahead. That distance matters, because extinction can flatten a dinosaur into its ending. Oviraptor is often introduced as a creature that lived before everything disappeared, then discussed through the error of its name. Both views look backward from human knowledge. The animal itself occupied a complete present, measured by seasons, hunger, danger, and the slow development of eggs. A nest is one of the best fossils for recovering that present. It contains a schedule. Shells record repeated laying. Embryos record growth. Adult posture records attendance. Sediment records weather and burial. The entire structure is a small ecosystem arranged around the future bodies inside it. At the center is empty space, the place where the adult folded its legs. That absence is functional. It supports weight, allows access, and gives hatchlings somewhere to emerge. Even the part of the nest containing no egg preserves behavior. The guardian is written as much in the hollow as in the bones. The strongest modern comparison is not a single bird species, but the range of behaviors living birds display. An emu male attends a large ground nest. An ostrich uses a communal system with shared laying and adult incubation. A megapode buries eggs and relies on environmental heat. A shorebird shades exposed eggs under intense sun. Each offers one piece of a problem oviraptorids solved in their own way. No modern bird builds exactly the same multi-tiered ring of paired, partly buried eggs. That absence is scientifically useful. It prevents a direct copy and forces researchers to test individual functions. The central hollow addresses adult weight. The exposed blunt ends address gas exchange. Sediment around the pointed ends stabilizes the eggs and affects moisture. Feathers expand coverage. The whole system is a mosaic. Crocodilians provide the other living archosaur comparison. They generally bury eggs in guard nests, then may assist hatchlings after hearing calls from within. Their embryos develop through environmental warmth rather than continuous body contact. Birds usually expose eggs and supply more direct heat. Oviraptorids combine partly buried eggs with adult attendance from above, occupying a reproductive space between the two living branches. This does not mean they were literally halfway to birds. Oviraptorosaurs and birds inherited traits from common ancestors, then evolved separately for many millions of years. The ring clutch may be a specialization with no role in bird origins. The broader pattern matters. Complex parental behavior and feathered brooding postures existed outside avialae, showing that bird-like reproduction has deeper roots among theropods. The arms are central to that pattern. In flightless oviraptorids, long feathered forelimbs might seem excessive if judged only by locomotion. Nest coverage gives them a practical role without excluding display. An adult could extend a feather surface over eggs while keeping its heavy torso in the center. This function helps explain why wing-like anatomy could remain useful before or without powered flight. Feathers themselves began before flight. Simple filaments likely served insulation or display in early dinosaurs. More complex veined feathers later created broad surfaces. Natural selection could modify those surfaces for signaling, nest coverage, balance, and eventually aerodynamic performance in some lineages. Oviraptorids demonstrate that a wing can be valuable while the animal remains firmly on the ground. The nest also reframes the beak. In the thief image, the beak exists to crack stolen eggs. In a parental image, it becomes a multi-purpose tool used to feed, preen, move sediment, tend shell, and perhaps assist hatchlings. A change in behavioral context expands anatomy without changing one bone. Living birds use beaks with astonishing versatility. They build woven nests, turn eggs, remove shell, feed young, clean feathers, fight rivals, and process food. Oviraptor's beak differed in shape and internal mechanics, but it likely carried the same general advantage of a lightweight keratin tool placed at the end of a mobile neck. Function changed from moment to moment. The neck was flexible enough to reach the clutch edge while the body remained centered. It could inspect individual eggs, clear sediment, and preen breast feathers. On a nest, mobility of the head matters because the rest of the body stays constrained. The adult's attention moved through the neck even when the hips and legs remained nearly fixed. Eyes placed laterally, but with some forward overlap, would monitor both nest and surroundings. Exact visual fields depend on soft tissue and skull reconstruction, especially in a crushed specimen. Close relatives suggest good vision. A guardian needed to detect small movements without repeatedly standing, and a foraging omnivore needed to identify food against patterned ground. Sleep on the nest may have been fragmented. Birds resting in exposed places alternate deeper sleep with vigilance, and some can sleep with one brain hemisphere more alert. There is no evidence that oviraptorids shared that exact ability. Still, prolonged attendance required rest, and rest increased risk. The adult likely shifted between alert and quieter states across the night. Moonlight changed the desert surface. Pale sand reflected enough light for silhouettes to move between dunes. Temperature fell. Feathers fluffed to trap air. The adult's body became the warmest object in the clutch. Embryos continued developing without any awareness of the landscape above them. At dawn, the outer ring warmed first. If the parent lifted slightly, sunlight reached shell while air moved through the center. A behavior as small as changing height could alter heat transfer. Experimental models use fixed contact because living adjustments cannot be reconstructed, but those adjustments may have been the main way adults managed an uneven nest. The idea of management should not imply calculation. Birds do not solve equations before turning an egg. Sensory feedback guides posture. Heat against skin, shell movement, calls from embryos, wind, and light trigger responses shaped by instinct. Oviraptorids could achieve complex regulation through simple repeated reactions. Nest fidelity may have been equally instinctive. An adult returning from a short feeding trip used landmarks, scent, visual orientation, or memory to locate the clutch. Dune fields change, but major ridges, vegetation patches, and the sun provide reference. A misplaced return by even a few hundred meters could be fatal for exposed eggs. The crest may have helped a returning mate identify the attending adult from a distance. Species-specific shape reduced mistaken approaches where several oviraptorids nested in the same region. If the crest was brightly colored, it also increased visibility to predators, another trade-off between communication and concealment. Egg color could serve a different balance. Blue-green pigment may have camouflaged the exposed ends against shadowed vegetation or sediment. Though the goby background and original colors are uncertain, pigment may also have strengthened shell or signaled female condition. Because several functions can coexist, a single adaptive story is rarely sufficient. The word misunderstood applies not only to the animal, but to the expectation that every trait needs one purpose. Crests can display and regulate tissue. Feathers can insulate and cover eggs. Beaks can crush and clip. Nests can warm, stabilize, shade, and defend. Biological structures persist through combined benefits, some strong in one season and weak in another. Oviraptor's reputation was simple because simplicity travels easily. A thief, a nest, a sudden burial. The revised animal is harder to summarize. It may have been omnivorous. It likely attended eggs. It had a bird-like posture, but a nest unlike any bird's. It was feathered, grounded, social enough to display, and ecologically flexible enough to live in a dry, changing landscape. That complexity is not an inconvenience. It is the reason the fossil remains important. One interpretation reduced the dinosaur to appetite. The growing record reveals anatomy, reproduction, physiology, environment, and the history of scientific inference. The nest becomes a meeting point for almost every part of paleontology. Children encountering the name often notice the contradiction first. Why call it egg thief if it guarded eggs? The answer opens a useful lesson. Names are historical, evidence changes, and science can preserve its mistakes without remaining trapped by them. The correction does not require hiding the original interpretation. It requires explaining why it once seemed plausible and why it no longer does. The original paleontologists worked with the fossils available to them. Protoceratops was common. The eggs were unknown. A beaked theropod lay nearby. Their inference was not irrational, and Osborne included caution. Later retellings often removed that caution. The greater error was not proposing theft, but allowing a provisional idea to become a permanent personality. Modern researchers will make provisional interpretations too. Some will be revised when new embryos, chemical methods, or better models appear. The Oviraptor case encourages confidence proportionate to evidence. It does not demand reluctance to interpret. Without hypotheses, fossils remain descriptions. Without revision, hypotheses become myths. The animal's scientific legacy therefore includes humility, but it should not end as a lesson about humans. Oviraptor was real before its name and unaffected by its reputation. It did not become a guardian in the 1990s. The later fossils only allowed us to recognize behavior that had already occurred in the Cretaceous. A parent settles over a clutch whether anyone understands it or not. Feathers cover the shell. The crest lowers against the wind. Beneath the adult, embryos grow through stages no observer will see for more than 70 million years. The scene needs no verdict. It continues until sediment arrives. Return to the original block of sandstone. The eggs are no longer smooth. Pressure has cracked them, and preparation has exposed only part of the clutch. The skeleton is incomplete enough that the eye must learn where one bone ends and another begins. Nothing resembles the polished certainty of an illustration. The evidence is rough, compressed, and interrupted. The skull lies close to the eggs because that was where the animal's head came to rest. Early observers looked at the beak and saw a tool for opening shell. Modern observers look at the arms and see a body arranged around a clutch. Both interpretations begin with anatomy. The difference is the comparative record built between them. One embryo was enough to change ownership. One brooding adult was enough to make care plausible. Repeated adults made the posture a pattern. Eggshell pores, ring geometry, feathered relatives, and heat experiments added mechanism. Science did not discover one dramatic answer. It accumulated a structure of mutually supporting details, much like the nest itself. At the center of that structure remains uncertainty. Oviraptor may not have warmed every egg evenly. It may have left the nest often. The adult beside the type clutch could have been male, female, or an individual unrelated to the layer but still attending. Exact behavior cannot be recovered from a single death. The guardian is a reconstruction with strong support, not a witnessed biography. Even the eggs introduce a final caution. Similar egg forms can be laid by close relatives, and several oviraptorids may have occupied the region. The clutch beside the type specimen belongs to the oviraptorid reproductive pattern, but assigning every shell specifically to Oviraptor velociraptor is difficult without an embryo diagnostic to species. The fossil ties the animal to the nest more securely than it ties the nest to a precise taxonomic label. This is common in deep time. Species boundaries are drawn from incomplete bodies. Behavior may be clearer at the family level than at the level of one named animal. Oviraptor becomes the doorway through which the broader biology is understood, even when Citipati and other relatives provide the best preserved rooms beyond it. A reconstruction can honor that by changing focus rather than blurring names. Begin with Oviraptor at Baing-Jacques. Widen to the Oviraptorid embryo that identified the eggs. Move to Chitapati over a clutch at Ukha Tolgod. Compare other nests across Asia. Then return to the type fossil with the added evidence. The animal is not replaced by its relatives. It is illuminated by them. The first scene now appears differently. An adult has not crept toward another dinosaur's nest. It has already invested days or weeks in the clutch. Its position is settled, not lunging. The hands are not tearing at shell. They lie where feathered arms would cover the rim. The body is not outside the nest. It is organized around the hollow at its center. A sudden burial still provides tension, but it no longer functions as punishment. The sediment does not arrive because the animal was caught stealing. Geology has no moral timing. A dune fails, a storm moves sand, or a bank collapses. The same event could kill a predator, a parent, or an animal merely resting in the wrong place. For the embryos, burial ends development. Gas exchange stops as pores fill. Temperature falls. Soft tissues decay. Tiny bones may separate inside the shell. Some disappear entirely. The nest becomes a failed reproductive attempt and, much later, a scientific success. The two outcomes belong to different scales and should not be confused. Without that failure, the clutch might never have entered the fossil record. Hatchlings would leave, shell would scatter, and the adult would continue its life. Paleontology benefits from events that were disasters for the organisms involved. A complete skeleton often records rapid death. A preserved nest often records interruption. The beauty of the fossil is inseparable from that loss. Yet the lineage did not depend on this clutch. Other nests hatched. Young survived long enough to breed. The behavior persisted across generations and species. Oviraptorids remained diverse until the closing part of the Cretaceous, proof that their unusual reproductive system worked under many conditions. Their extinction at the end of the period erased the ring nest from the living world. Birds survived. But no surviving lineage carried exactly the same architecture. The central hollow, paired eggs, rising tears, and large brooding body became a combination known only from stone. Evolution had tested it for millions of years, then removed every living example. What remains is enough to reconstruct function, but not sensation. We know the eggs exchanged gases. We can estimate how heat moved. We can map the adult's weight. We cannot know the tactile feel of ridged shell beneath feathers, or the precise call of a developing chick. Evidence approaches the scene closely, then stops. That stopping point is where responsible imagination begins. It uses anatomy and physics to enter the landscape without pretending to observe what was never preserved. Sand can move because the deposits are aeolian. The adult can spread feathered arms because relatives preserve the structures and skeletons preserve the posture. The eggs can warm unevenly because models test the geometry. Color, sound, individual temperament, and family bonds remain less certain. They can be suggested lightly but should not carry the argument. The strongest story is already present in the physical arrangement. An adult theropod repeatedly sits in the center of its own kind of clutch. That fact needs little decoration. Oviraptor's skull still invites speculation about food. Perhaps the adult leaves the nest at low light and clips seed-bearing stems. Perhaps it turns stones for insects or takes a small lizard. Perhaps it scavenges a carcass along a dry channel. The diet could shift across a season. None of these meals requires the animal to specialize in eggs. If it encountered an unguarded nest, opportunity might overcome restraint. That possibility does not restore the old verdict. A guardian can also be an omnivore. The behavior preserved at the type site remains attendance unless stronger evidence indicates predation. Ecology is not character, and one food choice would not define an entire species. The title Misunderstood Egg Guardian therefore contains two corrections. Misunderstood refers to the human reading of the fossil. Guardian refers to the broader reproductive evidence. Neither should turn the animal into a symbol. Oviraptor was not falsely accused in a way it could experience, and it did not care for eggs to teach a lesson. It followed a successful set of behaviors inherited through evolution. Those behaviors connected the adult to a future it could not see. Each embryo carried variations in anatomy, color, metabolism, and response. Most would fail before maturity. A few would build nests of their own, arranging pairs in rings through the same repeated movements. The continuity existed without memory or instruction. Across generations, small changes altered the system. A slightly wider wing covered more shell. A more stable egg angle reduced breakage. Better timing matched food availability. Stronger site fidelity returned adults to suitable ground. Selection accumulated these differences until nest and body appeared designed for each other. Designed is a useful visual word and a dangerous biological one. No animal planned the final architecture of the lineage. Each generation inherited a partial solution and modified it through survival and reproduction. The hollow center did not appear because evolution foresaw a heavy adult. Forms that reduced breakage simply left more descendants. The result can still be elegant. Biology produces elegance without intention. Eggs curve around empty space. Legs occupy that space. Arms extend to the rim. Feathers close the remaining gap. A complex physical problem is solved through parts that evolved for multiple uses. When paleontologists uncover such a nest, they reverse the order. They begin with the final structure and infer the pressures that shaped it. A ring implies sequence. A hollow implies weight distribution. Exposed blunt ends imply gas exchange. Adult posture implies attendance. Every conclusion moves from object to process. Errors enter when one process is chosen too quickly. The 1924 interpretation moved from proximity to predation. It was possible, but not uniquely supported. Later evidence supplied alternatives and then made one alternative more probable. The history is valuable because the original mistake was understandable. It also warns against using rarity as proof. Before the embryo was found, no one had seen an Oviraptorid inside those eggs. That absence did not mean the connection was false. Before brooding adults were found, no skeleton demonstrated the posture. Behavior existed before preservation revealed it. The fossil record is incomplete in systematic ways. Small bodies are lost more often than large ones. Soft tissues vanish more often than bone. Dry surfaces erase tracks. Successful nests disappear. The record favors failure, rapid burial, mineralized structures, and places where erosion later exposes the deposit. Every reconstruction must account for what preservation selects. Oviraptor survived those filters unusually well in one respect. The name made it memorable. Even a mistaken story kept the fossil in scientific and public attention. When new evidence arrived, the reversal reached beyond specialist literature because people already knew the accused animal. Misunderstanding created the conditions for a widely understood correction. Museum halls now often show Oviraptorids feathered and crouched over nests. The pose is quieter than a running predator, but it draws attention because the relationship is immediately recognizable. Visitors see limbs surrounding eggs and understand attendance before reading a label. Anatomy communicates across deep time. The label still needs precision. It should distinguish Oviraptor from Citipati, explain that the original eggs were first attributed to Protoceratops, and note that later embryos identified similar eggs as Oviraptorid. It should describe brooding without claiming every thermal detail. A few careful sentences can preserve both wonder and accuracy. Outside the hall, living birds repeat older pieces of the story. A pigeon lowers its breast over eggs on a ledge. An emu settles into a broad ground nest. An ostrich shades a clutch beneath open sun. None is an Oviraptor, and none preserves the exact ancestral behavior. They show what feathered theropods can do with body heat, posture, and attention. The connection is strongest at the level of continuity. Dinosaurs developed feathers, active metabolisms, complex eggs, and forms of parental care. Birds inherited and transformed parts of that biology. Oviraptorids followed a neighboring path that ended, leaving fossils where living descendants might otherwise have stood. At Bain Jack, erosion continues. Sandstone surfaces break down each year. New fragments appear, and old exposures vanish. Somewhere within the formation, another nest may still be sealed, containing the skull, feathers, embryo, or track association needed to answer one of the open questions. Discovery depends on the rock reaching the surface at the right time and on someone recognizing what has appeared. Recognition has always been the turning point. George Olson recognized that rounded forms in sandstone were eggs. Osborne recognized a new theropod, but misread its relationship to the clutch. Later, researchers recognized Oviraptorid anatomy inside an embryo. Still later studies recognized heat flow, pigment chemistry, and nest architecture in details earlier observers could not use. The fossil has not become less mysterious as methods improve. Its mystery has changed. The old question was whether a strange dinosaur stole eggs. The current questions concern how it laid them, how much warmth it supplied, which adult attended, what the young did after hatching, and how the nest functioned through a desert day. Better evidence replaces one simple mystery with several precise ones. That is a sign of progress. Vague uncertainty becomes testable uncertainty. A future fossil can identify the species of an embryo. A model can compare different feather coverage. Eggshell can be sampled for pigment or temperature. A nesting surface can reveal spacing. Questions become attached to objects and methods rather than remaining general speculation. Oviraptor stands at the center because its name preserves the first question. Every time the genus is spoken, the history of the accusation returns. The word cannot be corrected, but its meaning can be explained. Egg thief becomes a record of what scientists once thought, not a summary of what the animal was. The nest offers a better summary. It is organized, repeated, and physically matched to the adult body. It records investment over time. It places the dinosaur among its own eggs, not outside the life of its species. It shows a theropod using feathers and posture for something other than flight or attack. A century after excavation, old specimens can produce new evidence without returning to the field. High-resolution scans distinguish internal fractures from anatomical openings. Digital models allow the crushed skull to be restored cautiously, one bone at a time, and compared with Tsitapati, Khan, and other relatives. Surface imaging can reveal tool marks, shell texture, and areas hidden beneath earlier mounting material. Reanalysis also exposes the history of preparation. Fossils collected in the 1920s were stabilized with the materials available then. Adhesives darken, plaster fills gaps, and labels change. Conservators must separate original bone from restoration before anatomical measurements are trusted. The specimen is both a Cretaceous object and a record of a century of museum work. Collections matter because new questions arrive after excavation. The researchers who collected Oviraptor could not test eggshell pigment chemistry or run three-dimensional heat simulations. They preserved enough of the object for later generations to ask those questions. A drawer can become a field site in miniature when technology makes an unseen structure measurable. The same principle applies to fragments that once seemed unimportant. A piece of shell without an embryo may carry poor orientation. A small vertebra can reveal growth. Sediment attached beneath an egg can identify whether it was buried. Scientific value does not always match visual completeness, and spectacular display specimens are not the only fossils that change a story. Future work may also come from comparison with living animals. Measurements of heat transfer through feathers, sediment, and shell can narrow the range of plausible postures. Studies of bird and crocodilian embryos can clarify developmental timing. These experiments cannot turn a fossil into an observation, but they help identify which reconstructions obey biology and which merely look convincing. Through all of this, the original nest remains the anchor. A digital model can rotate it, a chemical analysis can sample it, a new paper can reinterpret it. None of those methods should detach the bones from the physical arrangement that made the specimen important. The body is above the eggs, and every explanation must account for that fact. Near the end of the Cretaceous day, wind lowers. Light moves across the dune face and reaches the broad ends of the eggs. The adult shifts in the hollow. One arm settles farther over the rim. Grains collect against the outer shell and stop. Beneath that shell, an embryo rests with its head folded toward its chest. Tiny claws are already formed. The beak is hardening. Blood moves through membranes pressed against the inner wall. The animal has never seen the desert, but every movement above it is part of the environment in which it develops. The guardian remains, because leaving carries risk. It does not know that the nest will fossilize, that the species will be named, or that the name will be wrong. It knows heat against the body, wind through feathers, and the position of eggs beneath its arms. Later, rock will hold the posture after muscle and feather are gone. A century of human interpretation will pass over it. The thief will appear in books, then fade as embryos and other nests are found. The bones will stay where they were. At the base of the red cliff, the clutch remains a circle around an empty center. The skull rests close by. The hands extend across stone that was once loose sand. The accusation survives in a name, but the nest preserves something quieter. An adult stayed.